Good morning, welcome. We'll give just a minute as people come in. Good morning, thank you for being here. We'll give a few more moments as people are entering. All right, good morning, everybody. We'll get started. Thank you so much for being here for day 3 of the NIH Career Symposium. This is our last full day. We have a lot of great panels planned today. We're going to hear from people who are working in data science, people who are working in science administration. We're also going to hear from some folks who made different decisions after their PhD about how they thought about their post-PhD training. And that can hopefully, if you are a current grad student, hopefully that can help you think about whether you want to pursue a postdoc and what you want that to look like. If you are currently a postdoc, it may help you think about how long should my postdoc be? Should I do a second postdoc? How do I decide when this training is done? And so I look forward to all of that. We'll also have a talk this afternoon on career transitions. So thinking about how we make those transitions successfully, including the transition from your current training role into a future job. Before any of that, though, I'm very excited to introduce my colleague, Ulli Klenke, who is going to talk about navigating careers in the US and internationally. There are so many stressors that face international scientists, and she's here to help you think about some of that and really think about the international job search. So I'll hand it over to Ulli.
Thank you, Laura. So welcome to today. I'm currently the Director of OITE Resilience Programs and Program Specialist for the Postdoc Office. But originally, I'm actually from Germany, and I did my master's many years ago in Germany, and then wanted to really go to the United States, and I did my PhD at the University of Maryland in neuroscience. And then, I had that choice. Did I want to go back to Germany or did I want to stay in the United States? And I got a postdoc at the NIH, at NINDS. And so I started my fellowship there. And after that, I worked, I was so engrossed in my projects that I really didn't want to finish right away. And so I became a research fellow for 2.5 years. And so I really stood in front of those same questions and decisions that you are going to face as an international scientist here in the United States, or even as somebody who is in the United States and actually wants to go and branch out and leave their comfort zone and do research somewhere else. It's never easy, and especially not easy when you are on a visa and you have a lot of requirements and need to think about those things. So I hope today I can address some of these things. And, in your current position, you're a postdoc, you're a grad student, you ask yourself, where are you heading next? And you need to decide if you want to look for a position, nationally, which means inside the United States, or internationally. And then you will need to determine your next steps on that career path to get there and be ready to take the step when it's coming. And so during this presentation, I'm trying to highlight many steps that you will need to take when you want to prepare yourselves for either of these options. And just to start, I'd like to show you a snapshot of 70 former NIH postdocs and where they actually ended up working after leaving the NIH. And you can see that scientists trained in the US are really spreading globally throughout the whole world. So what do you need to do to make this happen for yourself? So for one, you want to be ready, right? And that means, as we heard during the past 2 days, we heard about so many different career paths here at the Career Symposium. And many of the jobs that you heard about are actually available in the US as well as globally. So now it is up to you to identify the research and career opportunities in the area where you want to live and work. So where are you heading in that regard? And you need to start developing some helpful relationships and start to network. And I think the one thing that I heard over and over in the breakout rooms and from the panelists is that it is really important to develop a network that will help you find the right position. Many also mentioned how important it is to create effective job search materials, like CVs, resumes, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. The certificates you might have received during your time as a graduate student or postdoc, or wherever you are in your career level, and everything that documents your skills and your abilities. And maybe there is some additional materials. For example, if you have a family and you need to show documentation for that. So having all these things ready is important. Research summaries, for example, it's important to continually update those. The last thing that you want to happen is that you miss out on an amazing opportunity because your CV is out of date. Some job opportunities have deadlines as dates, but I'm seeing more and more that they have also like a cap saying, that we only take the first 100 applicants that have submitted their materials. So you want to be ready to submit that kind of paperwork. You need to make sure that you're aware of the rules and regulations in obtaining, for example, a work visa or visas for family members. And lastly, you need to be aware of the culture and language and how you will navigate them when you choose to move to a different country. So let's start with talking a little bit about an, let's say, ideal timeline for a job search. It's best to start about 24 months before your training end date to decide what you want to do next. This is the time where you should start building your network, attending, for example, this career symposium and connecting with the speakers that you found have an interesting job or want to learn more from. You can learn about their positions, their career paths. This is also the time when you should decide which path you actually want to take. And after this kind of career exploration, at about 18 to 12 to 18 months away from your training, you really need to increase your efforts in networking. You need to become more strategic with your search terms and the people you talk to. As I said, updating your CV or resume, making sure that you have all that you need to support the needed supporting materials I mentioned, and prepare for interviews and negotiation. And practice takes time, and it is super important to do that when you're so you're better prepared when you actually are in that room with that employer or in the Zoom call with that, to be able to shine and show who you are and present yourself. About a year before ending, I think you need to change your focus on finishing up your work in the research group, spending more time on job search and really focus on the positions that you are now interested in. And the closer you get to the end of towards the leaving time, you need to really intensify your job. And if you want to stay in the US as an international fellow, you see that your immigration timeline might not actually fit into this model. Processing times at the U.S. immigration services have changed and they have increased tremendously. I've hearing rumors that if you are requiring a waiver, that might take about 9 months, and then an H-1B, which would be like a next, or an O, they can take up to 9 months. So you need to figure that part out into your search timeline as well. But we will also talk about that a little bit later. So as I said before, all the careers we've been learning about in the past days and today even more are global options. You know, academia, industry, government, nonprofits, more research focused and more research adjacent, you know, research management, science communication, science policy, all of them are out there. Another big question that you will have to decide for yourself is, are you willing to possibly move abroad without a job? Or if you're a family or a couple and one has a job and the other one doesn't, you know, like, is that okay? Or is that actually a no-go? So I think having these thoughts and reflecting on them and asking yourself those hard questions is really important. So finding help for your job search, who can support you? If you have a career center at your institution, if you're at the NIH, make an appointment with a career counselor or a career coach. They can help you with so many things. They can help you reflect on what you want to do and create a personalized plan. They can help with those career decisions, you know, like they can help you by making, like, for example, the strong interest inventory or the Myers-Briggs or all the other kind of tests that are out there that can maybe help you narrow down where you see yourself in the future. They can help you with resumes and CVs and cover letters. They will be helpful to do a mock interview. You know, like I've talked to many postdocs and you know, like lots of postbacks that come to have a mock interview to practice answering questions that are like coming your way, because we can think about that a lot when we are at home and it's in our head, but then actually speaking and actually saying these words are much harder, especially if you're under stress. So being able to have a mock interview and practice is really important. They can help you with networking strategies. You know, like they can introduce you to somebody. They can do a lot of things for that for you as well. You know, talking to mentors, participating in career development opportunities in your societies, for example, the National Postdoc Organization, or in your research societies. You know, like I know the Society for Neuroscience and the Society for Endocrinology offer career support to their members. And many of the big societies have a large membership globally and can help you build your network in a country of interest for you. So, you know, like, and of course, your immediate network. I'm sure you're like, you worked with people. If you're interested in going home, you can network with them. You can ask them about others. You can find people at conferences and that are in the country that you're interested in. So all those, I think, are wonderful ways to help you with your job search. You know, another good option to learn more about different careers and that helps you grow your network are informational interviews. It is really important. I remember when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, meaning what do I do after my postdoc, I conducted, I think, about 40 informational interviews to narrow down where my real interests are. And I talk to people who do clinical writing, and I talk to people who, you know, teach at a small school, and I talk to people who do, you know, what's it called? Grant review, organized the grant review here at the NIH. And a lot of times I walked away and said, oh, no, thank you. That's not me. And a few times I was like, oh, that is really a cool job. I would love to do that. So you can ask a lot of questions about the responsibilities and the duties of an occupation or position. I heard a lot of those questions already within panels and also in the networking rooms. You know, you can ask about salary, typical benefit perks, and advancement opportunities. The downsides of the job, the risks probably, the typical derailers of a career in that job. What qualifications and experiences are needed to get the job? I think it is really important to understand, though, that you have to be prepared and do some background research with the person and about the person that you're interviewing so that you can leave a good impression. Because even though this is not an interview to ask for a job, if you leave a good impression, you never know what might come out of it. And if they have an opportunity, they might reach out to you and say, hey, we had this conversation. You really sounded excited. Maybe you want to apply. So those are really, really important factors when it comes to informational interviews. And a little bit more, like the important thing is that you can cover these 4 different goals. You can cover what is going on right now for the person. You can ask questions, how did they get into the field? Like what kind of skills and resources did they use to be prepared to find this position? Where do they see themselves in the long term? What are their opportunities in the field? And then do they have advice for you? Like maybe contacts, maybe you ask at the end, like, do you know somebody else I should be talking to? And so you're building your network through them. You ask for feedback, professional societies, insights into possible positions. One thing that I personally think is super important to understand is you're doing a practice interview every single time you do these informational interviews, because you also talk to them about yourself. And that is really important, because you find more and more ways to describe your skills and your abilities and your needs and your wants and your ideas. And that will prepare you wonderfully for the actual interview that's coming when you have, job opportunities. But now the question is, how do you build or keep a network abroad? Like I remember coming here, and after about 2 to 3 years, all my German connections had sort of dried off. And it's really work to reestablish or create those new networks. But there are places that you can look and start these conversations. You can start with current colleagues and alumni in that country, like people who are here in the US to work as postdocs, and maybe they still have a good network at home and can introduce you. You can reach out to former university mates. It's really fun to see where they are, and they, like if they're in the sciences, you'll be able to connect with them. Face-to-face conferences, career fairs, other events where that international people are joining. The Society for Neuroscience meeting, that's 30,000 people, and a large proportion of those come from other countries, and you can, seek them out and meet them. Technology-based, you can meet people on LinkedIn, on Crossing in Europe, ResearchGate, X, formerly Twitter, Facebook. Those are options. There are career services abroad. University have career services that you can reach out to. Nonprofits are there for repatriating or recruiting. Eurexis, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. The GSO, which is the German Scholars Organization. India has bioscience. There's diasporas and country at NIH groups here at the NIH, and they're really active, and they're science and biomedical research oriented, and they can help you build a network. Embassies in DC, a lot of them have talks and receptions that are science related. I know the German embassy does. I don't know how I got on it, but I'm on the list for the French embassy, and they do things. The Italians do it, the Austrians. So there's a lot of embassies that do this. Having people watch out for positions you can find only in country. If you have that network and they say, oh, I heard that these people are hiring, that might be something to find and look into job positions as well. But there's also some other important facts to consider. Each country is unique, and they're unique in their labor laws and their expectations for recruitment and the hiring processes and procedures. So that is something that you need to do your research on. There's a double pun, I get that. Recruiting lives online happens in the lives, sorry, not lives. See, there's my German secondary language kind of issue. So recruiting lives online in the US. Like there's Indeed, there's LinkedIn, there's so many things where you can get your CV on, and a recruiter might find you, or you look for positions. But that's less true in Europe. In Europe, there's a lot more face-to-face. There's a lot more looking into magazines and like Science and Nature, and reaching out directly to universities. They're posting it on their websites, but you have to do the effort of finding that. LinkedIn holds less power in other countries. It's hard to imagine, because all of us are on LinkedIn all the time and are trying to, grow our network, but that isn't always meaningful in other countries. For example, in Germany, Crossing is the way to go. If you want to, you need to make a profile on Crossing if you want people to notice you or connect with people there. They have LinkedIn too, yes, but not as much. There's another one in France, and that they're using, and I'm not gonna try to pronounce that. So, but there is other networking abilities online in other countries. But you need to know that. You need to find those. There's, like different expectations around benefit packages. Like if you're here and you have an idea of what you would get here in the United States, and maybe you've looked into positions here and you have a very good idea for negotiating, that might be very different based on the rules in other countries. So being aware of what might be compensated, what not, ahead of time, that might help you make decisions if you want to go there or not. And then the CVs and resumes, I mentioned that already. Like what is what? And there are definitely a big difference in the job search materials when it comes to specific region and countries. For example, a CV or resume. For some countries, that's actually a synonym. It's the same word. It doesn't matter. However, in the United States, if we talk about a CV, we actually talk about an academic CV, which has all your achievements, all the things that you worked in, all the degrees that you've done, all the publications, all the poster presentations, all the awards you got. So it's a very, very big and very long document. But a resume is a different thing. It's like maybe more like a 2 pages and 3 pages kind of thing. So, like in that little diagram that I found, it's from Top Resume. They say like it's called CV in the UK and in the EU countries, but it's actually what we are now talking about. That resume is actually something that is much more US, Australia, Germany, and Asian countries. The page length, like for most of them, it's about 2 pages long, but you need to know if you have to do that in letter size or in A4, right? And that's important because I know in Germany, if your application isn't up to snuff when it comes to the orderly thing, then they might put you at the bottom of the pile. Is personal information included? For some countries, not at all. In the United States, no birthday, no family status, no photo, no any of these things. However, in Europe, you have to put in your nationality, civil, your civil status, your birth date, your gender, maiden name, marital status, photos. No in the United States and other countries. However, in a lot of the European ones, a photo is required. You don't have a photo, going to the bottom of the pile. And you wanna make sure that you are aware of these things, so that you can put and create the best job materials that you can. Then there's cover letters and other documents. Do you need them? Don't you need them? How is the structure to be? I think in Germany, people are more interested about your education. In other countries, they're more interested in the way, like your experiences that you're bringing with. Another thing, for example, Japan, I learned that you actually have to do a handwritten resume CV. For a job position. So those are really important rules to know, to be able that your job materials are even being reviewed. So now that we're all prepared, that we have everything squared away, we are ready to roll, but where do we actually look for jobs? Where do I find positions? So here we list some sites where you can search for job listings in different regions. For example, Nature and Science list jobs all over the world. And I know that some of other people on the call are putting some of these things in the chat, or in the chat. There are, in Europe, for example, there's Euraccess links, and I'm going to talk about Euraccess in a minute. There's Euroscience jobs. But you also want to consider things that give you some funding, because we all know if we have funding, we'll easier find a position, right? So there's the Marie Sklodowska-Curie awards that you can get, and there are return fellowships to go back to Europe, or to go to Europe. It's not just back, it's also to go to Europe. But they have a certain clock, from the time you finish your PhD until you can sort of X number of postdocs to apply for those. There's the ERC, the European Research Council funding that you can apply for, which is giving you a big grant to work at a host institution in Europe. That will be helpful. And it's actually not just Europe, it actually has also other countries that are associated with it. So looking into something like that is important, and the links are here, and we're sharing those slides. And like, and then, like for India, there's again, indiabioscience.org, employment news. There's other ones. There's some for China. I would love for you, and you might have already started doing that because it's on my slide, if you could put in the Q&A box what other sites that you are using. And if you could share that with our, like with the audience, and just, if you know something else, please add it there so that everybody can read it, and we can also compile it, and if you have questions that we don't get to, send it out to you. So I think that's really important. So I said I would talk a little bit more about EURAXESS, and I think it's not just for you, it's coming from the European Commission, it's funded by that, but it actually is a very global access for you to find jobs. And on their website, if you go there, you can log in and sign up, and then you will be able to access a lot of this information. They talk about jobs and funding opportunities. They have career development on the website that can be helpful to you. If your institution doesn't have it, like you might find some really supportive things there and things to learn. They talk about their partnering, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They have a lot of information and assistance, and where can you find assistance. They have national portals, and they're worldwide. So they really, and I love that picture, actually. I really like that it's researchers in motion. Like it's you're one, and you click on that these other 4 light bulbs, and they're all going to turn on and help you, support you. And that's so wonderful with this. And here, just a snapshot that I took yesterday on their website. They're currently, there's 10,164 job offers all over the world, and it's all in the wealth of engineering, physics, computer science, medical science, and chemistry. And I clicked on medical sciences, and you can see that they have 1,277 job opportunities currently. And what I think is also really important is that they have 640 EURAXESS centers where you will find personal assistance. There's an email, there's an address. You can reach out to that person. You can build that network. And I think that's really, and you can ask specific questions that are, like towards that job position. And, like one more thing, they have specific national portals that you can use to like, what is happening in the United Kingdom, and how do I find a job there? And there's another one, for example, like they have job offers in Australia and New Zealand, 179 currently, and 91 registered organizations that will support you. So I think that is a wonderful resource that you can use. Okay, so move on. Now you found your position, and you have to move, and you possibly have to move a whole family, right? Where do you find that support? Like if you're going back, like if I would go back to Germany, I would have a very good idea of who to talk to, who to ask questions of, and I'm fairly familiar, even though it's been quite a while that I lived there. I've visited, so I would find my way around. But what if you don't? What if you want to go from, you're from a different country, but you want to work in another country right now? Or you're an American and you want to go and work somewhere else. Like, what do you do? So for one, the embassies themselves are really helpful. They have for sure the local knowledge and work requirements there. They can help you with what kind of visas do you need. Like if you're European and you go back to Europe, you most likely don't need a work visa for anything. But if you are from India and China and you want to work in Europe, you will need a work visa, and you need to figure out how that works. For example, working in Australia, they have a specific visa for biomedical researchers, and you need to know how to apply for that because it's much easier to get. You can bring the whole family. There's a lot of things that are out there. So knowing that is really beneficial. They can also help you with, like, how does retirement work in that country? Is there an equivalent to an SSN? Like what benefits are being provided to people in those positions? So that is a really helpful information. As I said, EURAXESS, it's all over the world, and you can reach out to their contacts. But don't underestimate also the power, as I said earlier, of universities that always bring over international folk anyway. And that will be very helpful. Even if you don't necessarily go to the university, if you have very specific questions, they can still answer you, and a lot of people do. So that's something to consider. What happens if you're actually an international person, you want to stay in the United States? So let's focus on that a little bit. I think the earlier you inform and educate yourself on immigration pathways, the better it is. You know, like as an NIH person, contact DIS and attend immigration seminars. But also you need to understand what kind of visa options you have. For example, you know, like understanding the H-1B visa pathways. There's the CAP Unlimited versus the CAP Subject ones. The CAP Unlimited are mostly in an academic environment, and that is important to know. Universities, other institutions, you know, like they have that. While if you want to go into industry, there's going to be a cap. There's going to be deadlines. I think April 1st is one of those big deadlines. And if you haven't had your application in by that date, it's done for the year. You will not, there's not continual processing going on. And if you get that visa, you will start on October 1, but you do need for application a job offer. So those are things that you really need to consider. Also, there is not a lot of industry visas to begin with. You know, like there's about 65,000. And if you consider that for the whole United States, that's actually not a lot. So you need to understand that process. You need to determine if there's other visa options that you might have. You know, like there's the O visa available to some, which is a lot of work to get. It's not cheap. Like, as you know, as visa holders in the US, none of the visas are cheap. And so you need to consider what are your options. And then you have to make yourself a checklist for timelines. You know, I already mentioned, and I'm not, you know, like it changes obviously all the time, but I think currently it's about 9 months to wait for a waiver if you need it, and to wait for the H-1B, and that's a long time. So you have to make sure that you have that squared away and think about it. What are some resources here? You know, like obviously at the NIH, it's DIS, the Division for International, I'm mangling that. I'm not going to try. You know, acronyms are still not my friend after so many years in the United States. But the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, is really helpful. They have a great website that you can go into, and they really have a lot of information there. Your visa office at your institution where you are, an attorney who specialized into bringing people into the country knows a lot about how to do it. And then there's a website that is myvisajobs.com that can be very helpful. So, you know, like I think it's also good to understand that just because it worked for your friend or the other postdoc that you know somewhere, it doesn't mean that it works for you. All the circumstances that are around visas are very unique to everybody, the country you're from, what you're bringing to the table, and all of those is something that needs to be considered. And so you have to make your own case the way that it will work for you. So even though it worked for somebody else and they got the H-1B or the green card, you know, like it will be different for you. And that is something that we need to embrace and think about. I'd like to also talk a little bit about your job search strategies, because it is an overwhelming process. I mean, everything that I just talked to sounds really great if I present it, but going through it and doing it is anxiety driving and very overwhelming. So try to develop a routine from the beginning, like set up your goals, hopefully with that help of that career counselor, and then work within that routine on a regular basis. Be organized. Try to make sure that you have everything squared away and you know where you find things. And work on it in an organized fashion. You know, like if you work on your CV, don't try to look for jobs at the same time, for example. Establish realistic goals and expectations. What do you want to achieve and what do you expect of yourselves? Because sometimes you get really unhappy and frustrated, but it's actually on us, right? And so finding that great middle pathway is important. Seek support. If you need help, find people that can help you, and then explore alternative opportunities. So be prepared for a plan B. Things might not work out the way you're planning. So be aware that you have something else that would be a good second, or that you maybe start in academia first if you actually want to go into industry. And then when you have a visa, you might be able to pivot and go into industry afterwards. So think about these things, because that might be really important. Take care of yourself. As I said, it's an overwhelming process, and being able to understand that you have well-being and resilience resources at your institution is helpful. Make sure that you have support, like your family, your friends, your coworkers, current mentors, former mentors, your network, that you can reach out and get and brainstorm ideas how things work. Take care of your needs. Don't stop eating and don't stop exercising and don't stop sleeping, because all this is what you need to, while you're working, be creative and get your stuff done in the work, but also to be creative and thinking about that job search. Because if we're resilient and we're rested and we have eaten and we've done exercise or gone for a walk, we're in a much better space with our mental health to be able to address all these things that will come our way. And then, if you really have issues, reach out for professional help. Therapy can be really helpful, and it can hold your hand while you're going through this really hard process. And so I do want to give you some OIT resources on the way. Here are some wonderful blog entries about, resumes and CVs, about interviewing, about networking, career resource guides. I know that people are putting stuff in the chat right now, some links to our resources on our website. Those are things that were made with all trainees in mind, and they're really helpful, and it's a great way to start. And then if you have questions, you have to come and ask them. Some other resources. Even though I said LinkedIn is not always or all everywhere, but it is important. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Say you were at this talk and you would love to connect, and that you get, with me being your first link, you might be able to talk to people within my network, and as a second or third, because you're easier able to do a cold call or send them a chat on LinkedIn. Seek out the speakers who participated in this year's Career Symposium. Hoover is wonderful. They have listed all the speakers. You have emails. Reach out, talk to people, find out how they did it. Because sometimes we get creative and we hear things that other people did. And you're like, oh, I never really thought about that for me as an option. So that is something that I think is really, really helpful. Use our YouTube channel. We have a lot of things that are on there that could be helpful. OITE career workshops, things that were recorded last year. Maybe at the last career symposium, there was something that we didn't offer this year. You want to go back and check. There's many on CVs and resumes and cover letters. As I said, it's overwhelming. If you haven't heard the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series, maybe that is something that will help you to think about how you can stay well during this process. And I think that's really important. Read the OITE blog. You have the link to it. There's a lot of information in there that can be super helpful to you in that period of job search. And if you have questions, you can always email me. And I see that there's questions in the Q&A, because now it's actually time for questions. I thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this was helpful. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And then let's hear what you're asking.
All right, thank you, Ulli, for that great talk. So I'm going to verbalize a couple of the questions that are in our Q&A. So someone is asking, and you talked a little bit about this when you were talking about time management in the job search, but they're asking how to balance, everything they have going on. So that's, taking time to finish projects in the lab and writing manuscripts. So can you talk just a little bit more about sort of the time management aspect of the process?
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Like when I looked for a position after being a postdoc, or like while I was a postdoc and I wanted to move out, I also had a child, a very young one, a baby. And so I had the feeling I had 3 full-time jobs. And like, how do you navigate that? Like, how do you deal with that? Because that is, like, as I said, a job search, especially an international one, can be full-time. So the one thing that I can say is, if you start early, if you think about that timeline that I put out there, you can decrease the at moment to a smaller portion, right? You can start reaching out, you can start thinking about it while you're still in the lab and you're doing things. And you can, let's say, a couple of hours every week, you can think about it. So being strategic about your job search and being like finding out what you want to do and then pursuing that, I think will help, because it disengages a little bit the immediacy of needing to work full time. So that's one thing. As you said, time management. If you want to, you can, like participate and take a time management course to learn what works best for you. Like for some people, it works wonderfully to say, okay, I'm doing my job search Tuesdays and Thursdays from, let's say, if you're working early in the morning, you do it, let's say, from 7 to 9 a.m. and then you go a little bit late into the research group, and you can focus on that and do it. Others are more like, no, I have to do a little bit every day, and then I feel better. So you might set away like a half an hour over lunch where you can do it, or you do an hour in the evening that you assign for it. So being organized about it and trying to figure out where does it fit in best. And then, I understand at some point when it really heats up the job search, it will be overwhelming. So make sure that you then have support, like have your documents ready, have talked to people, have everything like lined up like ducks in a row so that you can do it. Is that easy to do? For sure not, because we all know we're messy people and life gets messy. But at the same time, we can try. And I think that's the most important thing. Because if you have a strategy, if you think you have it under control and it's not just that uncertainty, we feel so much better about it, and we can deal much better with having to do a lot for a little bit.
Thanks, Ulli. That's really helpful. I'm gonna have ask you a question that sort of has two parts. So there's a few questions about sort of the specifics of J1 or H1B and specific situations. So the first part is, could you direct people to a resource sort of where they can find questions maybe about specific visas and how to make those transitions? And the second part of this question is someone asking specifically about grant writing or having their own funding when applying for jobs that require visa sponsorship. So sort of those two.
Okay, so the first one, like what I said, if you're at NIH talking to DIS and learning more about visa is important. USCIS is really, it's a tough to navigate site, but it does have all the information that you need to learn about it. Having a consult with a lawyer might be helpful. Like if you have maybe a more difficult kind of thing. And usually a first consult call can be cheaper, or doesn't even, some of them do it for free in the beginning. So those are maybe options. myvisa.com, that the one, they talk a lot about it. And they have search engines where you can type in, what comes after J1. I think those are your best bets when it comes to visa. It's complicated. And so, like, even though I had my own path and I have an idea, it's really hard for somebody who isn't within the realm of like how visas work to actually talk about it in a way that you can quote me. And so you really need to find professional guidance on that one. So I would strongly suggest to do that. Not all J's come with a waiver requirement, right? That is definitely something that is either based on the fact that you're working for the government, or it is based on the fact if your own government has paid money. So for example, I had a friend from Ecuador, and he was funded on a J visa by Ecuador. And so they required him to go home for those 2 years and pay back and do things. So that is important to understand. So not every person on the call who is maybe at a different research institution actually has that waiver requirement. So they're in that case, in the timeline, they're in a better stage to move from a J1 to an H1B. As I said, there's it is something you will need to discuss. I know some, I don't know all. There's definitely visas for different options. So reach out and find out. I think that's the most important part to do. And like the National Postdoc Association has reoccurring talks about visa and how postdocs can work with visas, and they have people on their website that you can reach out to. So use the resources that are available to you. And then the second part of the question was funding abroad. So sometimes grant applications can be submitted by anybody, but you might need a host in that country. So I do know for sure that the ERC, the European Research Council applications for some of their funding is open to everybody at every stage after your postdoc, to everybody, to every country, except you have to want to work in one of their host countries that are available to you. So you would need to reach out. You would need to establish a network. You need to reach out and come up with like bring your great idea to somebody in like France or in Italy or in Spain, whoever you want to work with, and then write that research grant together. And then you're like, if it was a great idea, then they might fund it. So there is opportunities in different countries for funding for many international people. And I know that if you go into the Euraxis website, they do have talks for for like how do you apply to these fundings, or the Marie Sklodowska-Curie. Other countries have other funding opportunities. So again, reaching out to the embassy and asking, like, how is the biomedical research being funded, and can you do that internationally? The UK has funding for things like that. Australia does that. So it is available, but you need to do the research and find it.
Thanks, Ulli. So I have a question here that's someone asking, seeing that a lot of times their colleagues and the people who need to know these resources aren't finding them. So how, maybe can you speak to how international trainees who or scientists who know about this information, how they can make sure that they're sharing it, maybe some resources here at NIH and in the broader community where they can be active to help, or where they can direct people to get the help that they need in getting this information?
And that's a great question. That's an awesome question. So I think being active on things like LinkedIn and posting and reposting things. Like I'm very familiar with the German Scholars Organization that help people, international people, to find positions in Germany, not just Germans to come back. So reposting that in public places and like on LinkedIn, so that people know. Being connected, like the NIH has, for example, country-specific listservs. Making sure that you get on that. The NIH has something called the Visiting Fellow listserv, right? Making sure that when you go to to an institution or work at an institution and they have these things already available, that you connect with them, and if you bring something to the table, that you actually reach out and the community can benefit from you. Here in the NIH, again, we have OITE. So if you have questions, we are always helpful to connect people. Visit, as again, the embassies do a lot of open houses that you can attend to where they talk about science. So maybe contacting your own embassy and saying, hey, I have some ideas of how to do this, and initiating some sort of event that they can host, and you can go and speak or invite other people. So you have to be a little bit active in terms of making that outreach and your knowledge available to others. But that again costs time. And so that is always the thing. If you are at an institution and they have career services, write it down, make a document. This was my job search. Here are the things that I used and that I was able to benefit from. And hand it over to the career advisors at your institution. They love you for that one, because they're like, oh, wow, that way they get the information and the information lives on. So being creative in terms of trying to share what you do, write a blog and put it out there. Like I know the NPA, the National Postdoc Association, they would love for something like that and being able to collect. So you can share. You just have to be creative in terms of doing it.
Thanks, Ulli. So there's a specific question here, but I want to generalize it a little bit. Sometimes there's not always a very long timeline that someone is, for example, given notice or something like that. And you've talked a lot about being prepared and making sure you have ducks in a row. We know that happens, sometimes. Can you talk a little bit about, in that situation, what people can do sort of in the moment, and what advice you might have for them?
Well, I think first of all, in that moment, you have to breathe, right? Because if you don't breathe, if you don't calm down that reaction, that fear, that panic of, oh my God, I have 9 months and then I have to leave. Like no funds, no money, no visa, no anything. So trying to calm down and work through that part, I think is my first line of defense here. And then I think trying to find help as soon as possible. Don't try to do it alone. Go and seek help from people who have done it before, either friends that you know, something that you can get help and support while you're in this. And then while you work with people, think about what's the worst case scenario here. And is that a worst case scenario? So now, and that is really to just calm you down again. So let's say my case, I'm hearing I need to leave. My visa is running out. In 9 months, I'm out of this country. So that would mean my kids are out of school. My husband needs to find a new position. I need to find a new position. We need to, and so the worst thing is we have to go home. But we still have friends at home. We still have family at home. And the worst part would be actually not that bad, right? So trying to figure out what's the worst that could happen. And then, what would be the best to happen? And that is where, again, the networking comes in, the trying to find help, maybe thinking about something that you could do differently first. As I said, if you want to go into industry and it's such a long haul until you get a visa and everything, trying to go for something else that might be easier and it's more achievable in the first step to move into that next level. So sadly, that's the only thing I can say, because you have to just be creative. But I think finding help to calm down, to be able to think and be creative again, and have this kind of more factual approach to things, and not just our cognitive distortions and our negative thoughts spiraling around and prohibiting us from being actually able and open to this change that's going to come. I think that's the most important first step.
Thank you, Ulli. I'm going to generalize this one too. So the sort of two bodies needing to be in one place. Someone is talking about how can I think about options that allow their spouse to work? Can you talk a little bit about maybe strategies and resources for people who are, coming for a position and wanting to help their spouse also find one?
So there's multiple ways. So I know that at some institutions, the partner, if you find a position and you're hired, you can negotiate that your partner gets a position there too, which is of course the best outcome, right? Because it's a 2-for-1 kind of thing, both get a position. That happens a lot in academic positions where there is that support. I know that a lot of countries have something like a dual career support system. So it's nonprofit organizations, or they are sponsored by the countries themselves, where you can say, okay, I found a position there. Can you help find my spouse a position? So there's support in those terms. I know Euraxis has some information on that one as well. And then it also depends a little bit of, if your spouse is in the same profession, if your spouse is a biologist or a chemist or somebody who's looking into academia, it might be a little bit easier than somebody who isn't. I do know that some of the companies that are in industry abroad, they also have that dual career support. So there's somebody who will help your spouse find a position. But it is a hard find, especially if you're going into a very small town and there is just not as much out there. I think these days there's more availability online, so remote work is definitely a good outcome when it comes to the pandemic, because there is now more options that you're allowed, for example, to work for somebody in the United States while you're abroad. And those are options that we didn't have beforehand. But making sure that you together make these decisions, and that your partner is then also looking for a job or for options how they can come, is a really important factor. But there is help and there is support, and you need to, if wherever you interview, say, I have a partner, I have a family that I would like to bring. Do you do anything for the partner to help find a position too? And a lot of times the answer is yes.
Thanks, Ulli. We have about 5 minutes left, and if there's a couple more questions that you would like to ask to Ulli, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. I want to ask sort of, you've talked a lot about the challenges and sort of navigating this process. Can you talk a little bit about, from your point of view and from your work with visiting fellows, the real advantages to sort of getting yourself out of your comfort zone and sort of, we know science is an international community, but talk a little bit about the rewards of, getting through this really difficult process and working internationally.
Well, first of all, I'm working international like a lot of people, and I think there's a huge reward because you get to know so many wonderful people you would have never met at home, and that are really, expanding your horizon and the way you see the world. I think for, like somebody in the United States who would go and move abroad, it is really a wonderful way of learning about different cultures, about how science is being done somewhere else, how the system works. I'm always amazed how different Germany is compared to the United States, and how similar in other things. So I think that's really important. Being exposed to a different language is something that is very helpful. And I think, like if you've worked in the United States and you go to a different country, sometimes the pace is very different. Things that are emphasized in the United States are not as emphasized in other countries. And they have their things. So being able, I personally found it very enriching, and it has changed me a lot compared to who I used to be before I moved into a different country. And I value that a lot. But I can also see that it makes you more open. It makes you more open to change, more open and willing to collaborate, because like now I work with a lot of people from Germany, and a lot of these things I think are really important and beneficial to your career. In Germany, it even is like beneficial if you go to the United States. It's more easy to find a position if you worked as a researcher in the United States compared to if you stay in Germany. And so there's a lot of that as well, that they value abroad the things that we have learned in the United States and bring with us to have creative ways to solve the problems that we see in science.
Thanks, Ulli. So we went really broad. I'm going to take us a little bit more specific. So someone is asking about, there's these processes that we have to think about in different countries. So they're asking about taxes, but there's also things like health insurance. Can you give people some general advice for sort of navigating these things that are specific to countries, but definitely are part of this process of living or working in different places?
Yeah, I mean, that's very much along the lines of the benefit package, what I was talking about. So finding out how that works in different countries, the embassies will be a wonderful resource for that. Eurexis has a lot of information about that. Finding out if there's tax treaties between your home country and a different country that you want to work in, all those kind of information. The health insurance, in Germany, for example, everybody is health insured, and here you have to insure yourself. And every international fellow who came to the United States to work here knows how hard health insurance is. So I think, and to be honest, if I would have informed myself about the health insurance here before, I would have been like, how is this ever going to work? So it is tricky. It's different in all the informations, but finding that sweet spot when it comes to information, to talk about that, and then talking to your employer, like that future employer, like when they say in the interview, like, what kind of questions do you have for us? There's that question is like, okay, if I would work here, would you support me in understanding like the benefits package and how that works? Do you support international people to sign up for health insurance and retirement and all these kind of things? I think that's a very fair question to ask, if they support it, or if they know who can support you in doing this. Right? It is tricky. That's the one thing about moving that I'm sure nobody likes, is like getting all these things squared away. But a lot of people do it, and there is resources out there for you to do it.
Thanks, Ulli. I want to give you one chance to just give one last piece of parting advice before I hand it over to Laura to close the session.
Yes, well, that's a good one. I think I gave a lot of advice during the session. I don't forget, it just may be daunting, but it's also exciting. you know, like there's so many things that you can do that you haven't done here. There's so many new things to learn about, so many things to embrace. And it's exciting to go somewhere else and learn new things and doing research somewhere else. And I think don't underestimate how important that is to stay motivated during your job search. It's a good thing. And if you made that decision, you want to do it, then go for it.
Uli, thank you so much for this talk and for all of these amazing resources. If you're in the audience, I want to encourage you to use the resources that Uli shared. There's so much here to dig into, to learn more about this, so many opportunities to learn more that applies to your specific situation. If you are an NIH intramural trainee, we have a networking session with international scientists immediately after this. And so I encourage you to attend that to be able to ask some more questions and learn more about how people make this work. For everybody else, there is a panel coming up on data science. So stick around for that. And then, of course, more sessions throughout the day. Thank you all so much. And Uli, thank you.